I lived in the area for 5 years as a renter, and I remember just a nice little community, a nice little place to be. And I'm going to let Kathy fill me in, and we're going to hear more of the history of the hamlet of Roseland. Kathy?
As Charlie said, we're going to be talking about Roseland today. That's Roseland, the hamlet in Penfield, not the Roseland Amusement Park in Canandaigua, because I have very limited knowledge about that amusement park. So we'll get started. One other thing, if I forget at the end, because sometimes when I'm at the end, I'm ready to be done, if you are a resident of Roseland or you have information about that area and you'd like to share it with us at the end when I'm done speaking, that would be great, because I'm sure there's a lot of stories that I don't know. Also, if you have photographs of the area that you'd be willing to let me copy, or paper items that you'd be willing to let us copy for the archives, that would be great too. Roseland is the northeast section of Penfield, bordered on the north by the town of Webster and on the east by the Monroe County-Wayne County line. The southern and western borders are not as well defined. A large part of Roseland is in the area designated as the 1,600-acre tract. The town of Penfield, east of 5 Mile Line Road, was divided into great lots, each consisting of 400 acres. This was very, very early on in its time. The great lots 7, 8, 9, and 10, which are up in that top corner, were subdivided into 4 100-acre lots for a total of 1,600 acres. So that's how it got the name 1,600-acre tract. And it was intended that resources would be pulled out of that area. There was a fine stand of timber in that section, and it was an area where they had charcoal pits and also lime kilns. And then this is just another. This is a 1902 map, and you can see that, if you can, it's a little harder to see on this one, but you can see the large numbers for the great lots, and then you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 starting up in the top corner. That's the division in the 1,600-acre tract. The area early on was referred to as the tract because of the 1,600-acre tract. Early maps show Plank Road as Tract Road. The district schoolhouse in this section, built at the corner of Plank Road and Hogan Road, was District 13 and was known as the Tract School. The building still stands today, and it's been converted to a home. I don't have any pictures of it when it was a schoolhouse. Charcoal was needed by the blacksmiths to feed the forges and by the tinsmiths for their soldering irons. Elm was the most desirable wood for this purpose, but any wood could be used. Making charcoal was a very labor-intensive process. The logs had to be cut, properly stacked, and covered with sod and dirt. They left holes in the outside in the covering for ventilation and for burning purposes. Then they had lit rods that they stuck down in the center of the thing, and when it started burning properly, all of the openings on the outside were closed. Then for 2 weeks, they had to keep a constant vigil to be sure that there weren't any breakthroughs. This is after it's burning. I'm sure the men that were charged with watching it knew what they were looking for better than I do, because I wouldn't have any idea unless it's just a breakthrough flame they were looking for. If there was a breakthrough flame and it wasn't put out immediately, the entire pile of wood would be just turned into ash instead of charcoal. The charcoal burner, or collier, which is also a name for someone who deals with coal, had a nearby hut or a shack where he could sleep briefly, because this is an example of a collier shack. Sometimes they would just go in there and catch brief naps for 2 weeks. What I wondered while I was reading that is, why didn't they trade off and on with somebody? But I don't know. Anyway, apparently they didn't. They just took naps in the shacks. Lime kilns were built to the sides of a hillside, and they were filled with chunks of limestone, which was also present in the 1,600-acre tract. It was fired for 3 days and cooled for the same amount of time to obtain lime from the stones. Lime could be used to make quick lime, which was used in mortar, and it was also used to make whitewash, which is a paint substitute, and it was used to brighten and disinfect barns, fences, and the outside of buildings. And lime also had other uses. Both lime and charcoal provided ready cash to the farmers who were raising crops, but also, maybe didn't have a lot of ready cash. The earliest settlers in this section had surnames similar to those found throughout the rest of the town: Harris, Case, Sharp, Weeks, Wilson, and others. Many of those settlers had come from New England or eastern New York. About the time of the American Civil War, German and Swiss immigrants began to settle in that section of town. These settlers carried names like Schrader, Leischer, Thiel, Struck, Schutt, Lyson, Lute, Stork, Bush, and others. And one thing I didn't realize until I started doing the research for this, there was also a number of Irish immigrants. It makes sense, Kennedy Road is named for some of them, but they settled in that Hogan Road and Kennedy Road area. Those families were named Kennedy, Orr, Moran, McGowan, McHugh, Hogan, Ward, and others. So it was quite a mixture up there, although we think of the German immigrants, and I think they were the most popular or the most numerous. This section of town sent at least 16 men to fight in the Civil War. I'm going to go over the ones I discovered, and if somebody knows another man from that area that was in the Civil War that I didn't talk about, please let me know. Abner and Betsy Frost lived near the schoolhouse on Plank Road. They had 4 of their 5 sons enlist. Byron and Henry, who were pictured here, and Jesse served in the 140th Volunteer Infantry. Henry and Byron were captured by rebels and sent to a prison camp, first to Andersonville, Georgia, then they were transferred to Florence, South Carolina. Henry remained a prisoner there until the end of the war. Byron died in the prison camp. It's very touching. There are records, they're actually published in a book on the 140th, letters that Henry and Byron sent home to their parents and their brothers. Byron was a beekeeper, and he keeps mentioning to his parents, please take care of my bees, and when I come home next summer, I'll take care of them. And he never made it home to take care of them. Their brother Jesse was ill during much of his service, and he was discharged for disability. And the 4th brother, Lewis, served in the 9th New York Heavy Artillery. Henry and Byron in their letters had encouraged Lewis not to enlist, but he didn't pay any attention. He enlisted anyway, and he survived the war. There was Philander and Rowena Montgomery lived with their family of 7 children on Salt Road north of Plank. Philander enlisted in the 26th New York Independent Battery in September of 1862 and was discharged for disability in May of 1863. His sons, James and William, enlisted in the 108th Infantry. William survived the war, but James was killed in the Battle of Antietam. Their brother Andrew served in the 140th Infantry, and he survived the war. And then another Montgomery family, Lyman and Tryphena's son, Lyman, enlisted in the 108th Infantry in the July of 1862. He was wounded at the Battle of Fredericksburg and died in December of 1862. DeWitt Clinton Hammond and his wife, Pamelia, lived with their 6 children on the south side of Hermance Road. He was 42 years old when he enlisted in the 8th Cavalry. That was in August of 1862. He was sick during much of his service, and he died of fever in November of 1864. We also have copies of letters from DeWitt Clinton Hammond, or D.C. Hammond as he was called, that he sent home to his wife, and it seemed it was always money was his concern. I don't know if the pay wasn't catching up with the soldiers, but he'd always say, when we get our pay, I'll send some home, and please don't farm out the children, which was something that was done in the past when the families needed money. They'd farm the children out to be servants in someone else's house or to do farm work. He didn't make it home. Jacob Leischer, who was born in Switzerland, lived on Plank Road east of the site of the future Bancroft store. He enlisted in the 8th Cavalry in September of 1861 and later in the 108th Infantry. He survived the war, and in 1896, we have a record by Aristides Church. He recorded what he knew about all the Civil War soldiers. What he said about Jacob Leisher is he's still living on the 1,600-acre tract in the town of Penfield. Bernard Matthews served in the 108th Infantry, and he lost a leg at Gettysburg. After the war, he made artificial limbs at different locations. He traveled throughout the country, made artificial arms and legs for soldiers that had lost them, and then when that area was taken care of, he'd move on to another area. William Orr, who was born in Ireland, enlisted in September of 1862 in the 140th Infantry. He was wounded in the hip at the Battle of the Wilderness, and he lived on Kennedy Road. Elijah Sofa lived in the Hogan Road area. He served in the 8th Cavalry. This is Bernard Matthews. Jacob and Clark Euchre enlisted in the 108th Infantry in July of 1862. Jacob was discharged for disability, and Clark deserted and went to Canada, where he lived out his life. I was trying to research him at some point in the past, and I couldn't find him anywhere, and then I found Canadian census, and he just remained in Canada. He never did come back. It just shows you everybody's not cut out for war, just like every other job. I have a number of newspaper articles, and I'm going to give you the site where you can go and look for them yourself at the end if you're interested, because it's really a neat site. And one of the articles that I found in the Fairport Herald, July 17, 1918, talks about Henry Frost attending his annual reunion of the 140th Regiment, which was held at Glen Haven. The day was an ideal one, and all reported having a fine time. In 1872, a group of residents in the section began meeting for religious services in the schoolhouse. They organized the Bethlehem Evangelical Lutheran Church on January 9, 1876, and built a church the next year. The church was dedicated on April 28, 1878. Several additions were added through the years, and a full basement was added in 1942. The parsonage was built in 1886 and enlarged in 1910. This picture looks like it's probably in the 1940s, judging by the car. The early services at the church were conducted in German, and the early records are recorded in German up till right around 1900. More than half of the founding families, the men and their families of this church, are buried in Smith Cemetery on Gloria Drive. I thought that was an interesting fact. It's almost like that's the burial ground for the church, even though it's not really that close to the church. After the original timber was cleared, apple growing became very successful, both in that section and then to the north and all along the lake. The preservation of apples was largely by drying. Dry houses were scattered throughout the town, including on Plank Road, one that was owned by the Bush family. Apples were picked, cored, peeled, sliced, and then they were laid out on racks to dry. What you're looking at is a picture of the back of a dry house, and these are workers sitting on piles of coal. And they, after the apples were laid out on racks, they would have been put out in the top of the building, and then coal fires kept going in the bottom of the building to dry the apples. When they were dried, they were packed in boxes and sold to surprisingly wide markets. And I have one of the apple boxes up here, not from the Bush dry house, but from one in Penfield. And after the drying was finished, Henry Bush finished drying apples Thanksgiving Day and gave his employees a very bountiful turkey dinner in celebration of the event. That was from December 4th, 1918, Fairport Herald. And another one I thought was an article that's interesting. Now, Bound Brothers was near the Four Corners of Penfield, but this is interesting because they shipped 5 carloads of evaporated apples to Germany and India. So they really were sending them to wide markets. From the newspaper articles, we also know this section down here, who the blacksmith was in 1897. This is from the Monroe County Mail, December 9th. We know it's Mr. Bowman, and his helper is Charles Hammond. In October of 1896, a notice appeared in the Monroe County Mail newspaper that a change had taken place in the hamlet of Lincoln. And Lincoln is right next to Roseland if you go into Wayne County. Otis Bancroft has withdrawn, is now building a store on the tract road. Henry Engert has taken his place, and the firm is now Engert and Son. Jimmy Newhall, who was clerking here, also left, and two of Mr. Engert's sons are serving their customers. So that's the first inkling we have of the store, knowing that Otis Bancroft is going to be building a store. In February 1897, we learn that Otis Bancroft is rejoicing over his young clerk, whom he helps to have for assistant in the near future in his store on the tract. And then on May 27, 1897, a notice was posted in the same paper which read, "A new post office will be opened at the tract this week with Otis Bancroft as postmaster." So we can pinpoint exactly when the post office opened. There wasn't anything I could find in the paper about when it closed, but I think it was when Mr. Bancroft sold the store. I think that's when the post office closed. This is actually a picture that's in Images of Penfield, Maud Frank's book, page 75, and she talks about it being a meat wagon that delivered meat in town. Petitioned for and was granted the okay to have a post office. They had to come up with a name. And what I'm told is, first, Mr. Bancroft wanted to name it Otisville. Some of the neighbors and the minister at the church at the time didn't think that was such a clever name. So they suggested that he name it after his wife, Rose. So it became Roseland. I couldn't find anything other than word of mouth that he had a wife named Rose. I'm sure he must have, because the story wouldn't have been made up. The next slide I have is posting the death notice of Mrs. Otis Bancroft. Again, we don't get to know her first name. She died last Monday, and that was April 21st, 1898. So she really didn't live very long after they opened the store and the post office. In the 1900 census, Otis Bancroft is listed with his wife Ella and son Mervyn, who is 3. Otis and Ella had been married less than a year, so you know that he was married before because he has this 3-year-old son. Tragically, in 1914, Mervyn, the Bancrofts' only child, died at the age of 17. Then I went through tax records to trace the history of the store. In the tax records of 1901, Otis Bancroft is crossed off and Fred Wagner's written in. The Wagner family, and I think that's when the post office ended, when the Bancroft sold the store. The Wagner family operated the store through 1913, and then in 1914, ownership changed to Arthur Brush. He continued as owner through the 1958 tax records. In 1959, Joseph Marula is the owner. And then I also looked in the Penfield directories to see what I could find. In the 1962 Penfield directory lists Joseph Marula as having a Sears and Roebuck repair site and store at that location. Otis Bancroft had been identified in something I found online. It was a program from the Walworth Lincoln Free Will Baptist Church. In 1891, Otis Bancroft was the clerk of that church. He continued in that Free Will Baptist tradition by becoming a minister. Reverend Otis Seneca Bancroft is listed in various areas across New York State and in other parts of the country, serving as a minister. His final resting place is in Mount Peace Cemetery in St. Cloud, Florida. And you can see he's buried with his wife, Ella. I don't know where Mrs. Otis Bancroft, his first wife, who I assume is Rose, I don't know where she's buried. I can't find her anywhere. Okay, Henry Frost, remember he was one of our Civil War soldiers. He returned from his Civil War service and married Ada Cowell. The couple raised their only child, Arthur, in the home where Henry had grown up. And this is a picture of the house taken by Jan Brayman in 1989. I don't know what it looked like back at that time, but this is what it looked like in 1989. An early newspaper item on Arthur, the son, dated December 16, 1897, tells us of his new endeavor. A new industry in this place is the manufacture of berry boxes and crates by Arthur Frost. Arthur married Carrie Grabb, and the couple lived with his parents in the old homestead and later moved to County Line Road. Again, another picture taken of their home on County Line Road by Jan Brayman. Arthur and Carrie had one daughter, Gladys, and then Arthur's listed in the 19th census as being a celery and fruit farmer. But the part about Arthur that's very interesting is not what he was doing for a living, it was what he's doing for a hobby. He was a very prolific photographer. He was also very talented at it. He knew how to set up photographs just to get the lighting right, to put the right details in it. He took photographs of his family, especially Gladys. We have probably as many pictures taken of her as some children have taken of them today, which was unusual for the early 1900s. He took pictures of the neighbors, animals, people at work, school groups, and many more pictures. Most of his work was local, Roseland, Webster, West Walworth, Lincoln area, but some of it is out of the area. The local history room has over 500 glass plates taken by Arthur Frost. They've all been developed and printed, and I didn't put them all on the screen, so you don't have to sit here through 500 of them. But I brought the books down because they are very interesting to look at, and I picked out a few. The detail and the quality in the pictures is excellent. It's such high resolution, they can be enlarged a great deal. If you've ever been in Penfield Town Hall, those great big pictures they have right in the entryway are some of Arthur Frost pictures, and I think they're like 30 by 40 or something. So they're really good quality pictures. So we'll just take a look at them. A lot of them we don't know exactly who's in them or where they are. This one is Gladys Frost, and she has a number of dolls out there. He's included those. Also, he's got the picture set up so you can see their boardwalk, and at the end going out that other way is a hand pump, and then the carriage steps so that you could get up in the carriage. It's just interesting, all the detail that he got into photographs. This is Gladys and a friend having a tea party, pretty fancy with a tablecloth, and it looks like they have donuts or something there to eat, but again, it's very detailed. He took pictures of school groups. The kids are holding chalkboards, and they tell you what school district it is and what the date is. I think this one's 1900. This is a group of workers. Some of the ladies look like they're angry, but they're standing with a corn sheller outside of a barn. And they brought things outside in a number of the photographs that would normally be inside furnishings, like this footstool. I don't know how well you can see it back there, but it's horns that are the feet on this footstool. And bicycles were coming into popularity around 1900, so lots of people had bicycles for transportation. And we can see in the background somebody has a hammock tied up back there. This, I'm pretty sure that's a dead chicken because it's still, and it looks like the child's about to chop its head off there, but I don't think that little boy could even lift that axe if he had to. Just a couple of musicians out there playing. This one's a little, the quality of this one doesn't seem to be quite as good as some of the others. Arthur Frost, we have some pictures he managed to take inside a building, which again, was a novelty around 1900 because they didn't have flash. So he had to set the pictures up so that there was a lot of light coming in, and this is inside a chicken coop. But you can see there's quite a bit of light coming in so he could get that shot. And this one inside of a lady's house. The other thing, when he did take pictures inside, they gathered lots of stuff together. They wanted to show off all the stuff in the house. So there's her books and a stand and flowers, lots of things. I almost didn't even notice when I first looked at this. There's a child standing up there. There are a number of his photographs taken at this very location. This one, somebody got a new Victrola that they obviously want to have in the picture. I think this might be at Henry Frost's house. And I think the next picture is a shot of that house again that Jan Brayman took that I think could be the same location. See, I think they were back in here and just some alterations over the years. But we don't know because the glass plates were given to the town in a trade with a Irondequoit historian. Jan Brayman and her mother managed to get some large books of photographs that were taken when they put the railroad through, and some of the photographs belonged in Irondequoit, so they swapped them. But the lady who actually had owned the glass plates remembered playing with them as a child. I'm surprised that any of them made it, that we were able to develop them, but they're also sharp. I brought one in so that you can take a look at it. It'd be a good idea if nobody touches it, because they are negatives, and they are sharp. It's glass. But we have over 500 of them, and there are a handful that are broken, but for the most part, they're in great shape. And then I also found some other interesting newspaper articles. This is one of Arthur Frost's pictures of the West Walworth new school building that was printed in the newspaper. So he was making himself known as a photographer. But some of the other interesting newspaper articles that I found. We forget about this kind of thing. The home of Peter Wilbert is under quarantine for diphtheria, because we don't even think about diphtheria these days. And that was in 1919. I think most of the rest of these are in 1919. John Martin has purchased an auto. So it made the newspapers. And the next one to me is even more amazing. Aeroplanes are becoming a common sight as some pass over nearly every day. In 1919, Sunday was a regular winter day as we had a blizzard which lasted nearly all day, and that was December 10th, 1919. And this is a 1928 map. Now, the post office was only open for 3 years, and it's kind of hard to see because so many names are written on here. But if you look up in this corner, it's still recognized as Roseland, even though the post office closed. And that's, like I said, that's a 1928 map. And that's what I have. Now, I want to invite, if there's anyone who has a story to tell or some more information that I didn't have, to come up and share it.
Well, I might add that a lot of the German immigrants came from Mecklenburg in Germany, which is a northeast Germany. Actually, I went to where my great-grandfather came from, and it's like 40 air miles from Denmark, just to signify how far north it is. And a lot of them came to the U.S. After Germany finally unified for the first time in 1872, and then there was mandatory conscription for the military. And then the other thing is that in Germany at that time, the sort of equivalent of the nobility owned most of the land, so you didn't have much chance of farming. You'd be maybe farming somebody else's land, but to own your own land, a lot of them came to the U.S. And my grandfather was born in Roseland in 1903, and his parents' marriage and his baptism are written in the German in the church there. But they wanted to have some more land, so they actually moved to Onondaga County. So they took their horses and everything and moved over to Onondaga County by going down to the New York Central Railroad, and they put all their stuff on in a boxcar and then went over to Onondaga County and got off there.
Thank you, Carol. That's interesting. Anybody else have any stories or information they want to share? I'm looking at Jan Brayman, hoping she'll.
This is about secondhand to me, but we have, my husband's family has a farm on Harris Road. And this would have taken place in the 1940s. My father-in-law and his brother, who were farming, and some other people who were working for them in the fall, were down on the muck behind the farm digging celery. When they noticed coming from Harris Road down the lane, this Willys type of, I can't remember the name of the truck, was coming very, very quickly down this farm lane, and they were down here on the muck. And as the truck was coming down, a young man was leaning out of the window, shooting back at a car that was chasing them. And it was the Federals chasing them. I think they were the T-men, and it seems as though there was a still over on Kennedy Road that they'd been watching, and they were transporting in this truck cases of illegal booze underneath. And at this point, my father-in-law and his brother and everybody ducked down behind things, and they tried to jump the ditch, thinking they could get the car over. The government agents caught them, but the young man that was shooting the gun out of the window became one of our famous mafia people here in Rochester. It was young Frank Valeni.
Great. So lots of things went on. It seems like a quiet area, a quiet neighborhood, but lots of things have gone on out there. Does anyone else have anything that they want to share? I almost forgot I was going to give you the, if anyone else is interested in looking up these newspapers, the site I went to for New York papers is nyshistoricnewspapers.org. And then there's a site at the Library of Congress. They digitized newspapers from all over the country. It's called Chronicling America, and it's chroniclingamerica.loc.gov. And I want to go back because there's information about people that died all over Penfield, and you know, I was focusing on just Roseland at that time, but there's so much information in the newspaper that, for one thing, I didn't know that aeroplanes were a regular sight in 1919, but apparently they were, if they were seeing them every day. If no one else has anything that they'd like to share, I'd like to invite you to come up and take a look. I have all of our developed pictures from Arthur Frost here. I brought one glass plate, so in case you couldn't recognize a glass plate, you can take a look at it. I just ask that you don't touch it because it actually is a negative and fingerprints will get on it. Plus it's glass and it's sharp. And then I brought some of the town maps down so that you can take a look at that Roseland area and the names that appear there and throughout time. And I think I mentioned this before, I brought an apple box for dried apples so you can see how they were packed and shipped.
Kathy, I just wanted to mention where I've lived, which is just to the west of where the church was on that side of the road. There's definitely evidence of an old nursery in that area. Lots of pine trees, Christmas trees, and things like that. But it was just an amazing time being in that area. I mean, very quiet, like you said, except when our friends came over with their motorcycles. Not quiet, but it was a good time. You learned a lot. I met people in that area just to have conversations with, and it's a treasure in itself. And thank you for performing.
There's one lot that shows up on some of the maps. I can't remember which one's off the top of my head. The name Kennedy and Orr are both on it. Those are two of the Irish immigrants, and it's on Kennedy Road. And so I thought maybe I'd find out they had a nursery. I can't find anything out about that. I haven't so far anyway. I don't know if they operated a nursery of some kind or if they just went together and bought this farm field and owned it together, so both their names were on it. So if anyone has any information about that, it would be great to know.
The one thing I'll say, the Storks would have been great-great-grandparents of mine, and there was 4 lots across the back end of that farm. You can show 3 of them subdivided off. The one stayed with the Stork farm, that they're all wood lots that other parties in the area owned, that they would go back. And on one of the previous maps, you can see there's like a small sliver that they show, and that was the access to go back to, each one of those 5-acre lots. And there were stories even of the gypsies, going back, if you will, and going back in that laneway. But,
Wow.
and all of them right now are all owned by the Wilbert family, the entire parcel.
I don't know why Dave reminded me of something else I was going to mention. I couldn't find the dates for this, but Kay Thompson in Penfield's past mentioned that there was a mushroom growing operation on Plank Road east of Salt. And at some point, someone told me a tornado went through there and destroyed some of the buildings. But Bob and I drove out yesterday, I think it was, and we were looking for them. There are the remains. It was a long, low sandstone building, and if I found the right building, there are still parts of it standing. So I don't know when the mushroom growing operation was there. I tried researching it with the address, and either whoever was there listed himself as a farmer, not a mushroom grower, or it was a hobby, and so that whatever their profession was what was listed. So I don't know any more about it other than that. Anyone else? Thank you. You've been a great crowd.